Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, welcome back to Basketball Conference, the ACC Football Podcast. My name is Joey Weaver. He is Mike McDaniel. Mike, we continue our season previews, and tonight we're talking about the Noles, baby. Who we got on with us tonight?
James Coleman, former Florida State running back, friend of the show. He's all over the place. The easiest way to just find where he does his stuff, and we'll let him plug it all towards the end of the podcast, is just on social media. James, what's going on, buddy?
Hey, man, I'm just happy to be here, guy. I can't wait till the season starts.
It's getting closer. We're excited as well, getting into it. It's an exciting time for Florida State fans, especially. You know, James, we were talking a little bit before we got on here, is that it felt like going into 2022 that Mike Norvell was in a little bit of a need for a good year in year 3 of his tenure, and boy, did he ever get one. Florida State goes 10-3, a pretty exciting year. Really, the 3 losses were all close, competitive to some really good teams as well. Really, this was the best Florida State team that we've seen since Jimbo left, for sure, and maybe even a couple years back into the Jimbo tenure. So I guess, would you characterize it that way, that maybe Mike Norvell needed a good year and got one, and things now are really looking up on his tenure? Or is there another way that you would tend to describe things that way?
No, I can see how it could be described that way. I mean, I wouldn't say like he had to win 10 games, but like when you look at your friend who's been taking a lot of shots and you're like, man, that guy could use a win, man. He could use some good luck or the ball to bounce his way. And because when you look back on the 2021 season, I mean, a Hail Mary against Jacksonville State, which the game shouldn't have been close, but you win that game, you go to a bowl game. You should have probably beat Florida. There was a lot of games you should have beat Notre Dame to start off the season. You were in a lot of bad breaks, but you know, you nobody cares about that. Nobody cares about the Blaber. Just show me the baby. So with this season, he came out the gates. You beat LSU. I'm in a close matchup, rematch with Brian Kelly, and you know the season's going well into that stretch of 3. But one of the things that I've been educating fans on, because I had to step back and realize, I didn't realize how young of a coach Mike Norvell is and how many firsts he's still dealing with. And when you really step back and you look at it like that, the success, especially what they're doing now, is he's building it the proper way. And this team is going to grow up together.
James, in terms of how the fans viewed Mike Norvell, like coming into the tenure, obviously he was one of the best coaches in the group of 5 when Florida State hired him, and they were coming off of Taggart, and you know they really needed something to go their way after the way the Jimbo Fisher era ended. How do you think fans feel about Norvell now versus kind of where they were at after year 1, and you know, really even after year 2?
I think most of the fan base is at least seeing where the vision is and seeing where it could go. I think the fan base is reflective of kind of where the nation was at. It was a situation where people like tag. They like the idea of the first. A lot of people did not like the fact that it was kind of uncommon. What does that mean? It's uncommon to fire a coach a year and a half into their tenure. But when you really look at it, it was going downhill very fast. And a lot of fans really don't believe Mike Norvell was the choice in the beginning to when they fired him. And I can understand that. You don't fire a coach in the middle of the season to hire a group of 5 guy and let him finish his season. So it was a lot of things that people just felt like Florida State wasn't being treated like the Florida State that they believed it should be treated. And then in comes Mike Norvell. You go, COVID happens. You go 3-6. You go 5-7, and a lot of people are like, "Well, we could have lost for a lot cheaper because you know now we're playing buyouts and things of that nature." So when he comes in and he does, and then the recruiting wasn't what it was. So Florida State was getting hit by all angles from rivals. You're losing on the field to the rivals. You are losing in recruiting the rivals. And now it's like, man, we got to get something. So comes in 2022, not only do we beat rivals relatively convincingly, and now with the recruiting trust. So most people who weren't on board with Mike Norvell, right now they're at least drinking the Kool-Aid.
James, I want to talk about the quarterback situation in in Tallahassee at Florida State for a second, and I call it a situation. I don't know that it really is much of a situation at all, other than a potential Heisman candidate in Jordan Travis, a guy who transferred in from Louisville a few years back. I think he actually played. Correct me if I'm wrong. I think he played for a year under Willie Taggart. So he's been here for a long time. He is an older guy. He's played a lot of football. What is his ceiling? Do you believe it is a potential Heisman level kind of season we could see from him, or is he going to be more just judged by the performance of the offense as a whole?
I think the team success level solely depends on Jordan Travis. One of the wildest things is former offensive coordinator Kenny Dillingham told me, he's like, Jordan Travis with average athletes around him is a Heisman Trophy candidate. And if you really go back to the stretch of the 3 games that we lost, I'd argue if he used his legs a little bit more, but if you pick up one win against Clemson, Wake Forest, and North Carolina State, Jordan probably gets the invite to New York for the Heisman Trophy presentation. When you not just look at his statistics, but when you look at the highlight level plays, look at the play he did against the University of Florida, where I think I counted 10 broken tackles that he had on his way to what should have been a touchdown, but they said because he slid, they marked him down at the 1-yard line. But the kid is doing things and consistently just curves naysayers. They said the guy couldn't throw. So what does he do? He shows them how much of a better quarterback he is. And what they did was they picked up 2 more dynamic weapons to be able to help him take that next step, and a Keon Coleman and a Jaheim Bell. But they're going to be able to add to the passing game, and you add to the fact that you have to respect Trey Benson in this running game. It's hard to guess right, because when it all fails, he is the X factor. So if you take away the pass, you take away Trey Benson with the run, you still have to account for his legs. And that's 3 things that makes it very difficult in this football game, especially where the spread and the RPO is becoming so much more prevalent in the game.
I'm curious about this, James, because Florida State is so, and you mentioned this, they're extremely Jordan Travis dependent. What lies behind Jordan Travis in terms of if there were an injury? Obviously, Florida State's got incredibly high aspirations this year. They're expected to be one of the best, or if not the best team in the ACC. They're expected to be this, playoff contender, potential representative for the ACC because of Jordan Travis. If he gets hurt, just like any major quarterback situation across college football, if you have one of the best quarterbacks in the country get hurt, the team's going to suffer. But is it really like all or nothing with Jordan Travis? Kind of what's behind him at the quarterback position, and how does Florida State look if something like that were to happen in terms of, okay, can this thing stay afloat? Can Florida State still be an 8, 9, 10 win team? It would be disappointing relative to expectations, but could they still be kind of a team that you can look back on with Norvell and be like, all right, that team still took a positive step forward, even against adversity?
I believe this is a 10-win team no matter what, and it's basically based upon the schedule. So I know a lot of people would be like, well, how could you lose your starting quarterback and still be just as good as you were the previous year? And what I mean by it, Tate Rodemaker kind of showed us that he grew up against Louisville. Jordan Travis got hurt early, and Tate Rodemaker had to literally come in, and he won that game. He started off very cold. I remember how I watched that game. I was coaching high school football because they played on a Friday night. I'm coaching. I'm looking at my phone on YouTube TV. I don't care what happens. I need to know. And I even said some things that were pretty anti-Tate Rodemaker because I did not like him. I said he's going to be a phenomenal coach, probably sell insurance, and that's really what he needs to be. But when he came and he threw an interception, I said, okay, at this point, I'm not even sure if he's a good person. I don't know if he likes Florida State at this point. He is trying. But then he comes back, and I said, you know what, man? I apologize. I take everything back. And I used his name being Tate. I said, there was the female anatomy for Tate. So I don't know, you guys have a family-friendly show, so people can kind of deduce what I was saying, and we ran a campaign for him. So I said, Tate don't got to make another play for me ever. But the fact that he won that, but I think He's who you would do, and he's really a good game manager. And that defense, who a lot of people bash Coach Adam Fuller, that defense is good enough to where if you don't turn the ball over or put them in bad situations, you can still win a lot of games based on your schedule. Plus, Keon Coleman had a terrible quarterback at Michigan State, so much so that that's why he left Michigan State. And I think Tate might be better than him. Johnny Wilson, huge catch radius. Jaheim Bell, you still have these weapons that I do believe you still can have mismatch problems with most of the teams that are on your schedule. Again, I want to emphasize to people, it's not so much that Florida State is just that much more dominant than everybody else. It's that they have literally a 2-game schedule in September. So if they're able to get out of September, there's no reason, looking at what they have up until the first weekend in December, or I think whenever the ACC Championship is, that you don't see them running the table.
We'll definitely get to the schedule here in a little bit, James. But you mentioned a couple different groups. You mentioned pass catchers. You've mentioned some groups on defense. I would say that I feel like as long as Norvell has been here, that's been one of the biggest changes that he's made is really turning over this roster and making it look like a Florida State roster probably should look like, what we got used to under Coach Bowden and a little bit under Jimbo. Is there one or two groups throughout this roster that you really feel like is the strength of this team, that the absolute best things about this, and when they get in those dogfights against LSU, against Clemson, which units of this team are they going to be really leaning on to carry them to victory?
I really think the best – man, that's a tough one. I would have to go it's on the offensive side of the ball. The best units are your wide receivers and your running backs. And again, you got Keon Coleman, who just transferred in just under 1,000 yards. Johnny Wilson just shy of 1,000 yards. Both guys up for major awards, with Trey Benson, who is going to be a guy who will eclipse that 1,000-yard rushing mark, if not more. And a host of other young backs like Lawrence Toafili, the way he runs routes out of the backfield is second to none. I think that's really where Florida State's strength is in their offense. They've got to be able to dictate other teams' offenses by how explosive their offense. So when that 2013 national championship team, and even using LSU's, was it 2019 national? I can't remember exactly when, but those offenses were so elite that it forced other offenses out of what they felt comfortable with. It's kind of like a great boxing match. In boxing, the guy who typically wins is the one who who makes the other boxer fight their fight. So if I put up 14 points on you early, if you're a running team, you kind of got to abandon the run game, and you can't play time of possession. You've got to get a quick score, which plays right back into some of the strengths of the defenses. So like the defense, like you got Jared Verse, Fabian Lovett, Patrick Payton, who's the ACC Defensive Rookie of the Year. If we get you, and Florida State's weakness is the run game, based upon last year and what I would see you do now. If we can get you out of that run, out of the ability to run, and you have to throw, and you've got a bunch of guys who are literally trying to make the NFL by getting sacked, they're gonna rack it up, and it's not gonna be a fun night for you.
James, you mentioned the rushing defense struggling last year. Defensive tackle was a spot where, I know the Seminoles dealt with a bunch of injuries. The rushing defense, I would assume, would be a little bit better this year, right? I mean, this is a pretty stacked unit defensively. You mentioned Jared Verse. Obviously, he's really more getting after a passer. But interior defensive line, like compared to a year ago when all those injuries happened, like how are things looking now? And, the rushing defense, I would assume, would have to improve.
It definitely did. I mean, with the addition of Brandon Fisk, one of the best transfer portal defensive tackles. He's a 300-pound guy that gives you this. And what a lot of people don't realize is that LSU game was great, but at the same time, we didn't leave very healthy. Jared Verse got dinged up. Fabian Lovett got dinged up. And when you look at FSU against the run with Fabian Lovett in the game versus him not being in the game, and it's a stark difference. A guy who's really stout against the run, and you lost that depth. That's why not having Daryl Jackson on that waiver really does affect Florida State and what they're trying to do now. So they got to, hopefully they'll get that win that appeal. But even if not, Fisk, Farmer, there's a young guy. I make sure I say his name. Ayo Tiafasi, who was an early enrolled. Excuse me. He literally reclassified. He was supposed to be in the 2024 class, but he came in 2023. Ended up redshirting. They've got some guys that I think will sneak in, and people will get a chance to know their names. But really, it's about really just putting pressure and bending the wheel. And I think the other side of it is what they're going to do with Tatum Bethune in the past in rushing. I think run blitzing will be something that Coach Fuller is going to have to do a little bit more to get this team where they need to be at.
James, one of the sticking points for this program for a number of years, starting with the end of the Jimbo tenure, was the offensive line. It's been a mess for a long time, but I sense, especially last year, and some of the work that Alex Atkins has put in particular, I sense that is no longer the case. Would you say that the offensive line is still a weakness, or is there something else that you would point to maybe now as if there is a weakness of this team, where would it be?
Offensive line definitely wouldn't be where I consider Florida State weak at. I would consider the weakest part I would consider is the defensive tackle spot. And that's more so because of lack of us actually knowing. Like, we don't know who's the guys behind Fabian Lovett and Fisk. You've got guys that can do something, but we don't have it on. We don't have the film to truly prove how good they are. But that offensive line, what Atkins has been able to do in getting them to understand what he wants of them, but also adding more depth and adding quality. So you're going in and you're getting a transfer from Colorado in Roddick. You're getting Keandre Jones from Auburn. You're getting some guys that actually look like large mammals. They're wide. They look good. Funny thing, 2 years ago, 2 seasons. Yeah, because 2 seasons ago, so this will be the third season. I took my son to practice because they had a practice here in Jacksonville. So we walked out there. My son asked, "Dad, is this a high school football team or is this a college football team?" I'm confused. And this was, what was he? He's 10 now, so my son was 8 at the time. And so an 8-year-old mind is very they're going to tell you exactly how they feel. They're very transparent. They don't hide it. Well, this year he's like, "Well, nah, Dad, they really all look the part. These are some large individuals and things of that." So except for the center, but Maurice Smith is just so consistent, and he has a lot of starts, even though he's really the odd man out when it comes to this. But they're recruiting who they're bringing in, and it's a bunch of guys that are hungry. I think if Mike Norvell makes the playoffs, there will be a case study, and I believe everybody will be talking about the way that he used the transfer portal and recruiting to flip a roster and make them more competitive. And a lot of the narrative is it's not sustainable to be able to build in the transfer portal. But the way Mike Norvell has done it is extremely sustainable. And so what I tell people is this. If I bring in a true freshman and they're a blue chip player, their goal is to get out of there in 3 years. So their freshman year typically is just okay. They're a key contributor. Then they'll start their sophomore and junior years. So that means I got 2 quality years of starting out of that guy. So when you look at what Mike Norvell has got in the transfer portal, there wasn't a freshman wide receiver they could have brought in that was better than Johnny Wilson. There's not a freshman running back they could have brought in that was better than Trey Benson. There's not a freshman defensive end they could have brought in that would be better than Jared Verse. There's not last season too. There's not a freshman linebacker they could have brought in that would have been better than Tatum Bethune. Before that, Jamie Robinson. They got 2 quality years out of Jamie Robinson. Fabian Lovett. You're going to get 3 quality years. So when you're looking at what he's doing on top of adding, then you go back and look at what he's done in the recruiting, it kind of also it starts to make sense because he's blending everybody in. And what's wild is Trey Benson, if he wants to come back, he can come back next season. Johnny Wilson, if he wants to come back, he can come back next season. Keon Coleman, if he wants to come back, he can come back next season. Jaheim Bell, if he wants to come back, he can come back next season. Jared Verse, if he wants. So the thing is, he's recruiting guys in the portal that have multiple years. So you're able to build a culture with guys that already have a year in college. Now you add that to what he's got for this 24 class. I would still argue Mike Norvell's biggest recruiting job is going to be to convince a bunch of guys who can smell and taste the millions and millions of dollars to maybe come back for one more year. If he could get 50% of these guys that are eligible for the league, then Florida State will be considered a playoff team for 2024 as well, with a noticeable drop-off at quarterback and some other positions.
James, I'm curious, because of the job Mike Norvell's done, and just from the outside, just really flipping the program, right? Because, I mean, Joey mentioned the last few years under Jimbo, I mean, the offensive line was not very good. And then, obviously, Willie wasn't around too long, right, before they hired Norvell. It just feels like just over a span of a few years, just the entire narrative around the program has totally changed. And Florida State went from a team that won a national title under Jimbo to kind of falling off and being a little bit more middling to obviously not fulfilling expectations under Willie to then, you know, the athletic department obviously sticking with Norvell even when it was rocky from the start. I'm just curious in terms of culture and how he flipped it. Can you just kind of compare for us the culture of the last few years of Jimbo versus what, the 18 months Willie was in charge versus kind of where things are at now? Because it just seems like it's a totally different program and a lot more like the program we saw 10 years ago early in the Jimbo regime, right? Versus, all the mess that it's been over the last few years.
I think the difference is the drama and the outside noise being able to affect the players. Mike Norvell has really come in and got these guys to buy into each other. And what hurt a lot of programs actually in turn helped Florida State. So 2020, we all had this massive thing called COVID. We were all shut down. All we knew, nobody was around each other. Well, that was his first year. But because of that, the NCAA instituted a lot of different rules. One-time transfer rule was instituted. But they started the transfer portal. They started that before that, but very few people knew how this was going to go. But when the NCAA suspended APR, that completely changed everything. So Mike Norvell had the opportunity to create his team. If you think about a corporate takeover, when somebody buys a company, they normally fire a lot of the executives and they bring in their own executives. And it's an art of war strategy. When the subordinates don't follow, you give them one chance to correct it. But if they don't correct it, you don't get rid of the subordinates. You cut the heads off the generals. So he cut the heads off of the female generals in this thing. If you've read the Art of War, and then those girls had more incentive to teach the other ones some movements. So what happened was he got rid of a lot of the guys who weren't buying in or weren't doing what they were supposed to do, and he brings in guys who are hungry, like a Johnny Wilson, like a Trey Benson, like guys that he probably recruited at Memphis that he knew he could come and get now. Now, he made a couple mistakes along the way, but the cool thing is he doesn't make the same mistake twice. So now I'm going to go back in time. Before then, it was literally a reality TV show. After the 2013 season, you win. Florida State's at the top of it. What happens to Jimbo Fisher? Jimbo Fisher, regardless of what you may or may not believe, we know he got a divorce. And divorce changes people, sometimes for the good, sometimes for the bad, but I know a lot of people can't shake it. With that, but you were good enough for 2014 for you to moonwalk into a college football playoff. But after that, you saw Jimbo slowly losing the reins of his team and lose control. Boosters were getting upset, attacking him. Fans were noticeably attacking him, and he's attacking back at fans. So attitude reflects leadership. So what you're seeing Jimbo do, you're seeing the same thing start to go with the players, and eventually the guys who won that national championship, who still had those, knew what it was supposed to look like. They're seniors. and they don't really know how to teach the next guys because it's not being echoed from the top. So I really believe personally, Jimbo, and then Jimbo on his way out, he didn't necessarily do the best thing to uplift the program and make it seem like it was a viable thing. He kind of trashed it on his way out. I think if he could do it all over again, he probably would change the way he said some things. But I also think, he needed a change of scenery. At the time, nobody was going to argue about going and getting $75 million guaranteed because no coach was getting paid that. Also, when he has a son with the rare form of, I believe, cancer, they specialize in that at Texas A&M. But again, the drama was there. Guys were saying they hated football. Now you bring on Taggart, who comes in like the cool stepdaddy and tries to love on everybody a little bit too much. But you can't do that. And he doesn't have the ability to get rid of some of the kind of the turds that needed to get rid of. And he came into it, and then he flipped he tried to do a 180 in the type of offense or the scheme that they ran. Jimbo Pro style, we're going to run 60 to 70 plays a game. Tag wants to run 100 to 120 plays a game. That requires a different type of alignment and a different type of shape. So they're coming in, and now guys are getting weaker because they have to adapt to the new system in which they want to put. Add that, Jimbo stopped recruiting offensive linemen after about 2014. So you're really weak in the trenches, and you missed on recruiting, and it's just a bad overall storm. They needed a tough coach that was going to give them love and bring them in. Now enter Mike Norvell, and again, like I said, the biggest thing he did was got rid of the guys who I don't want to say they were cancers because they're probably not bad kids, but they're on their third coach in 5 years. That's a lot. So, sometimes there's no coming back from that. They need to change the scenery too. So you got rid of the guys who needed to change the scenery, and then you got a chance to implement no drama. Mike comes in; he's a no nonsense guy. He's a tough guy. He's also a genuine guy, and I think that's what they're buying into. He is who he is, regardless of what time you meet him. He's not going to be different with me and you, and then go see a senator and kind of like be like, "Oh, okay, I gotta rub this guy off." Nah, Mike Norvell is Mike Norvell, regardless of who's in the room.
James, let's hit the schedule here. And you mentioned it earlier that, so much of this is going to depend on what happens in September. And a couple of non-conference games off the start, but of course that's the Sunday night Labor Day weekend game against LSU, a rematch of last year when Florida State pulled off a close win there. Home against Southern Miss, at Boston College, but then on the road at Clemson there in late September on the 23rd. Do you feel that, the way that those 4 games go basically will dictate the other 8, or do you think this is a team that would be able to avoid a letdown? If you start 2-2, do you think they have the wherewithal to finish 9-3 or 10-2?
Oh yeah, I think they definitely have. This is a 10-win team, no matter what. Like, I think they definitely can get through. They won't lose focus. And the crazy thing right now is the way the ACC just changed the rules. They changed the rules to where you can be number 2 in the conference overall and still make the conference championship. Now, before, if you lost to Clemson, you knew you're looking at the Gator Bowl at best, unless Clemson goes to a playoff. But now you can still go to Charlotte and you can still win and compete. So their season's not over after September like it's been in a while. But I really think that they don't fear Brian Kelly or LSU. They know that they can beat these guys. So they're going in and they're going in with a game plan very confident. And I think they know that Clemson may have been let off the hook the last couple of years. They've had a better show than they had the previous, 6 years before that, where you're getting your teeth kicked in. But I think Florida State feels extremely confident about what they're doing, and I think it'll show.
I look at the schedule, James, and I'm with you, the whole 10-win sentiment. I just don't know who else on the schedule other than LSU and Clemson can really trip Florida State up. Every single team, I feel like, from October on has questions. Like, Florida starting Graham Mertz at quarterback at the end of the year, like that. He's terrible. He's not very good. North Alabama's a win. Miami is in year 2 with Cristobal. They're a total mess. Pitt's got a new quarterback.
That's a home game.
That's a home game, too. Pitt's got a new quarterback. Wake's got a new quarterback. Duke could be semi-tough in terms of, like, they're well-coached and they have a good quarterback, but the talent across the roster is just not even a comparison. And then Syracuse and Virginia Tech are two teams that I think at best are middle of the pack teams in the ACC. I just don't see another team on the schedule outside of the month of September that can really trip Florida State up at all.
And that's why I always, when people are like, "Oh, I was like, dude, have you looked at our schedule?" I was like, I'm like, it's not an arrogant thing. I think, Pitt is a very well coached team. We play at Pitt, but their quarterback was the quarterback that was at Boston College. We have zero fear of that quarterback. And again, it's one of those things where I think can Pitt hang with us offensively? That's the biggest thing. They're a time of possession, hard run team. We're going to try to press that. Multiple formations and things that you're not going to be used to. Miami, rivalry game, but Miami, I didn't even realize it. Miami signed 42 freshmen. That's a lot of people in a class, man. Like I was like, that's insane. To push that many guys out, and the people that got in the transfer portal, some of them are already not working out. There are complaints, and Florida. I'll say this: not just Florida, Miami, Florida State are beat too. I don't think the beat likes the teams because like the clips that they put out, like show these guys in the worst possible situations. So Florida had some scrimmage video get leaked, and we saw their starting left tackle get like thrown 5 yards into the backfield by a guy that we don't really know who's the defensive end. I'm like, if that's the guy that's going to be there, Jared Verse might put Graham Mertz on some merchandise with the doves in the heavens and the clouds. That guy might die. And it's not being arrogant. It's just like, that's not optimal. That's not what I want to see. I want to see my defensive ends win, but I don't want to see my starting left tackle getting demolished. That's, so it's just who is the guy? What team can you after September, can you just say, man, woo, that's going to give Florida State a tough one outside of Duke? And even then, Duke is a better coach team. They were pretty good. It just doesn't roll off your tongue the right way because we've never lost to Duke. Like it's like Wake Forest still feels weird because Wake Forest was we called a Jersey game when I played. Wake Forest, Duke, we go up by 30 on them really quick. Fourth quarter, I take my shoulder pads off and I put my jersey on and I'm walking on the sideline because the game is over. That's, I think, I'm not saying we're going to blow Duke out. I don't know. I actually think Duke Clemson is a game that people should watch. That'll let you know if the conference is going to be freaky this year. But I still don't see anybody that gives me any kind of reason to have pause.
Let's take a quick second to remind you about Section103.com. It is the internet's premier place for all things wonderful, wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. They have t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies. They got a couple of three-quarter shirts. They got buttons, stickers, all sorts of things. Things for men, women, children, something for the whole family. Every Georgia Tech fan in your life can use something from Section103.com. Use promo code GOACC for 10% off your first order. They've got some new things all the time coming. Recently came out with some new player shirts, jerseys, I guess as the kids would call them. Things with a logo on the front, a number on the front, and a number on the back, along with a name. They got shirts for both Zach Pyron as well as Dante Smith, who kind of project to be Georgia Tech's starting quarterback and running back this year. So if you want to support those players, I believe they get some NIL money out of it too. So just keep that in mind for what it's worth. They've got the Juniors Grill shirt. They've got all sorts of great products there. They've also recently come out with a clearance section. So if you're looking looking for some T-shirts or a couple of hoodies for a slightly lower price point, go check out the clearance section. Once again, it is section103.com or at section_103 on Instagram. Give them a follow. Check it out. All things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. Again, using the official team colors, the official word marks, everything. It is all officially licensed. It is super comfortable, super high quality. I love mine. You will love yours as well. Check out the performance wear if you're looking for things to keep you cool here during the summer. In any case, one more time, that is section103.com, the internet's best place for all things wonderful Georgia Tech apparel. That's it for now. Let's get back to the show. The only other spot I was going to call out here, and it's not that there's – I was thinking as you were talking about Duke, James, is that you're correct, it's a well-coached team, but there's nobody on that roster that, if I'm Florida State, there's no one individual that, like, could beat you, right? Like, I don't know if there's anybody that's particularly outstanding, and I think probably the same thing I would say about Boston College. But that is the one spot I will call out that could be a little bit tricky, being a road game, a nooner. It's the red bandana game for Boston College. It's a look-ahead spot with the Clemson game the following week. That's the only other spot I would call out that might be of concern. But again, it's not that I think that Boston College would have any business beating Florida State most weeks. It's just in that one particular spot, something could go sideways. You never know.
They got I said something else. I said, when they found out they put us as a red bandana game, I said, I hope we beat them like we're the Crips. And I know what the red bandana game means. I fully understand that. But it just always trips us up. I hate it. That being said, they had a first round draft pick at wide receiver that we shut down, and they had a quarterback that everybody talked about was one of the best in the ACC until we destroyed him, and he's at Pitt. So ain't nobody, unless Doug Flutie is walking out that tunnel, I'm not really worried about Boston College. And even then, I'm still not worried about Boston College. It would take Doug Flutie, I forgot the defensive end that I played against. It was actually pretty good. It would take all their greats right now to come back and make this a solid game. But I do understand the peeking to Clemson. And I really think it would be really the only way Florida State really peaks at Clemson is if we lose at LSU. I really believe if we beat LSU, then we're in the driver's seat because now we're looking to go 3-0 in the Clemson as opposed to 2-1, and we're in the driver's seat. So that's kind of the reason why I think, and one of the things I think Mike Norvell is doing a much better job of is learning. So when we think about the 3-game stretch that they lost, North Carolina State, Wake Forest, and Clemson, that's new territory. Every time is new uncharted territory for Mike Norvell. Coached at Memphis, and he played at, I think, Central Arkansas, so he ain't played in no big games, and he ain't coached in no big games. He ain't coached in a rivalry on the road yet. There was a lot of things that he's still trying to get used to. So can you pull yourself out? But I'll say this. After the Clemson game, the explosion in Florida State's offense is why I have supreme confidence. It was a situation where we had multiple 40-plus point games against some guys that would be argued, like Kevin Steele. Regardless of how Miami fans feel him, Kevin Steele has been a notable defensive name in college football for some decades. I'm trying to think. Oklahoma's head coach was the DC at Clemson for years, and they put up a ton of points on him. It's a thing where I think Mike Norvell is feeling himself a little bit on the points on being able to score, which is why I also have more confidence.
James, you've said multiple times this is a 10-win team without a question. Are you picking 10-2 as the record, or you got something else in mind?
Nah, I'm gonna go 11-1.
Okay.
And they'll play in the ACC Championship. I just have a hard time saying undefeated. Saying a team can go undefeated, regardless, it's very difficult to go undefeated. A lot of things have to come into place, and I can't predict injuries. And so like if they stay healthy, there's nothing to say that they can't go undefeated. But I do believe if you're having me be 100% transparent and honest, Florida State goes 3-1 in the month of September, sees Clemson again, probably beats Clemson, and I think we can win an ACC championship. but I don't think we beat Clemson twice. But I can also see us going 4-0 because Cade Klubnik, though he showed me something that I thought was unbeatable in the ACC Championship, he showed me something very pedestrian when you actually have an opportunity to game plan for him. I got to see he got to grow up, and that would be his first time playing a big time game at home. And this would be if Florida State would be the best team he's seen in all of his reps. So I can see us going 4-0, but if he gets back and gets an opportunity to play us again in the ACC Championship, he's going to have a chance to have grown up by then. So, but I actually still would rather see. No, actually, I want to beat Drake May. I would love to beat the hell out of Drake May just to, see how it feels. But but it's a kind of a cool year in the ACC because we know it's probably going to come to an end soon. But it's actually what better way for us to have the final seasons of the ACC with actually some good ball games and some teams having multiple teams that we feel, at least in the beginning of the season, could represent us in the college football playoff, as opposed to it being the Clemson Conference.
Mike, should we ask James one more question and then let him go? We can give our predictions.
Yes. Yeah.
James, you're alluding to it. If I gave you some truth serum, is Florida State in the ACC in 3 years?
No. Florida State would not be in the ACC in 3 years.
How confident are you saying that?
Extremely confident.
Huh.
It's a divorce. We've already stepped out. We've seen what other people are like and how they're living, and I think it's something, unfortunately, that could have been prevented. The ACC went from being the aggressor and the innovator to being the team being a conference that's sitting back and waiting. Like when they went aggressive, when I was in 2004, we brought Miami, Virginia Tech, and then you killed a conference in the Big East. You went and you did these things. Then you sat back and you let the SEC create such a disparity. And where Florida State's not looking at just the ACC, where the ACC has the Tobacco Road, and that's really the big dogs in all of this. Florida State's biggest rival is the University of Florida, not just in football, in every aspect of life. And you can't spot a school $50 million a year and compete with them in academics and other things. So while I get why other people they're looking at this as clearly just a sports thing, but this is a pride thing and a thing where Florida State is trying to usurp the University of Florida as the flagship program, as a flagship university in the state of Florida. So that's really where most of this is coming from. And I can understand why people don't understand it, but this is just the reality. And I think when we let ESPN kind of kick the can down the road with the ACC network. Then when it made its launch, it wasn't on Comcast, which is literally the state of Florida. Like besides Bright House, it's not Bright House, it's called something else now. Besides Central Florida, but 90% of the state gets Comcast, so 90% of the state can't watch Florida State and Miami play games unless they get YouTube TV. That just affected the money and affected the relationship, and it's a tough thing. But I know it ain't when Florida State got the bar. One thing I've learned about people with money. Contracts really don't mean anything when you're ready to break them. At the end of the day, it's going to be how much money or how many other teams are going to say that they can't afford to be doing the same thing.
Man, I just don't know what we're going to name our podcast, James, when that happens.
It'll still be the ACC will be a conference. I think it just won't be as strong because you're going to have to merge and bring, some other guys back in. It'll never be the same, though.
God.
That's exactly what I would say. Never be the same.
I was going to say, we won't be having you on anymore because Florida State won't be in the conference anymore.
Yeah, that would suck.
Yeah,
that would definitely suck.
That would suck.
But we got, I don't, it's not going to happen in 2024. Logistically speaking, we have a game in Ireland that's going to be very difficult to replace. It won't, I think 2020, it's a 2026 thing at the earliest. But I just don't see a scenario unless ESPN just decides they just have to help the ACC and get the ACC up into where it's two ways, but one way nobody will agree to, and that's basically changing the revenue distribution.
Right.
And I'll be honest with you, even if they agree to that, it's still going to happen. We've seen it with Texas. Big 12 conceded for Texas, gave them the Longhorn Network. Texas still left. It's more of a matter of time, and any concessions are really just, it's a slow divorce. It's like, oh, man, you guys got to on my show, I could use more colorful analogies. I don't want to get you guys in trouble, but it's like, it's just, again, if it's a bad break. It's one that I wish could have been avoided because I do like playing in the ACC.
James, has been a lot of fun. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on, man. Do you want to tell the people real quick where they can go find your stuff?
The biggest thing right now at Den Media Group on YouTube. That's really what we're pushing. We give all kinds of different things. Once we have goals. Once we get to 3,000 subscribers, we're giving away $300 live on Big Games BS. So you literally just drop your Cash App or your whatever it is. At the end of the show, we will give away $300, and we'll give away a secondary prize of however many likes we have. So we have 100 likes on that show while we're going live. Somebody will get $100. But also, we do ticket giveaways. We have memberships and subscription services. So go to @Den Media Group on YouTube or follow me at @BigGameJames_36 for all the things.
Scott and I can attest to this. Scott, of course, our lovely producer, my brother-in-law. We have been to a James Coleman sponsored Florida State tailgate, and all I'll say is, if you're not going to those, you're missing out. That's all I'll say.
Yep.
And he's gone. And he's gone.
I think we lost James here, but I thought that was interesting. A lot of those things that he was talking about there, but Florida State, especially at the end. Definitely go follow the YouTube channel for all things wonderful Florida State content.
You know what? The thing he said about the thing heading for a divorce, and I hate to, that we have to continue talking about all this stuff with the ACC and how it's, running quickly towards its demise, and we're going to have to find a new name for the podcast.
The ACC Leftovers podcast?
ACC Leftovers, yeah. And we're going to be talking about teams we've never even watched before. The thing that I keep going back to is, like, James made the comment about the revenue redistribution, and he's 1,000% right. Like, the other members of the conference will never agree to it, number one. But number two, the TV contract is so bad right now that even if Florida State agreed to that money is not going to be enough, right? They can.
Yeah, it closes the gap somewhat, but not entirely.
Not entirely against that Big Ten and SEC TV money. So, yeah, they'll be getting a little bit more money from the ACC in that, scenario that will never play out, right? They'd be getting a little bit more money, from than other schools in the conference, but they're not going to be getting the money that they need to continue to compete against some of these Big Ten and SEC schools. So I just don't see it. And, once Florida State finds enough money to cobble together, they'll, pay an exorbitant exit fee, one that we've probably never seen before in college athletics, and they'll break the grant of rights and they'll leave the conference. So that's kind of where we're headed. I don't see any other plausible scenario. I don't see any other way. The grant of rights is too long. The TV contract is too bad, and ESPN's got no incentive to pay the ACC more. I just don't know how else this ends. I mean, I think that's how it's going to end. I think Florida State's going to leave, and I think some other schools, once they realize what it takes, they're going to follow. That's it. I think that's what's going to happen.
Definitely still some unanswered questions, though. So Florida State or whoever else leaves the conference, then what? Right?
I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, because part of this, right, is ESPN doesn't want to give the ACC more money. And I forget who it was that made the comment. I think it might have been Cam or something, but it was ESPN also basically owns the SEC at this point. Why would ESPN now pay out more money to have Florida State in the SEC versus in the ACC, right? Because they're just, they're taking it from ACC membership to SEC membership. That's ESPN to ESPN. Why would ESPN finance that? What's in it for them? Okay, well, does the Big Ten want Florida State? Well, I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. Who's to say? Mm-hmm. If not, what, are we just going to be independent? Is Florida State going to get an independent TV contract that's better than what they're getting right now from the ACC? So I don't know. I'm just saying That's one of several questions that has to be answered. Another one being, where is that money coming from that we're talking about right now? Looks to be around $500 million.
Yeah.
Where does that come from? I don't know. Questions to be answered.
Saudi Noles, baby. Saudi Noles.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing with, like, if Cal and Stanford were to join the ACC. I know it's a Florida State preview, so I won't get too off the rails. But, like, if Cal and Stanford were to join the ACC, which obviously is not going to happen now, if they were to join the ACC and the ACC was, like, trying to void their grant of rights and try to reopen television negotiations, try to, like, go down that path, like, that all sounds great, except, like, ESPN's got no incentive to pay you more money, right? The other TV networks, right? So ESPN's got the SEC contract. They're bleeding money anyway. ESPN is, right? So they're paying all that money for the SEC, rights. Then you have Fox, who's now in bed with CBS, you have the Big Ten that's in bed with CBS, Fox, and NBC. Like, NBC's got the Notre Dame contract too. CBS doesn't have the bandwidth. So, and Fox has the Big 12 also. So, like, where's the ACC going if it's not a re-up deal with ESPN? What, are they going to go streaming? Ask the Pac-12 how that went. So yeah. I don't see how this ends well from that standpoint. That's before you even think about a team like Florida State and, like, where are they going to go? If they find out that there's a conference that will take them, which I think those conversations become a bit more serious if these conferences see Florida State willing to pony up the money it's going to take. Like, Greg Sankey, who said the SEC is doing fine, we don't need other teams, to join our conference. I believe him, right? Until Florida State actually becomes available. Then I think that becomes maybe a more attractive option if they're actually going to pay the exit fee, right? I think, other conference commissioners and member schools are looking at this and they're like, is Florida State really going to pay $500 million to leave the ACC? Like, are they really going to pay that? If so, maybe we're going to have a more legitimate conversation. But until then, it's just like a non-starter. There's no reason to even go down that path. The grant of rights is too stringent, and it's too long. It's too far down the road. 2036 is a long time from now.
We're saying we don't know where Florida State's going to go one day.
Right.
Mike, do you know what Florida State is going to go this year?
I'm going to go 11-1. And then once they get to, assuming they're going to get to Charlotte, right, at 11-1, and then it's a coin flip game against, I would assume, Clemson. I don't want to play spoiler. We haven't recorded the Clemson preview yet. I have no reason to believe it's not going to be Clemson with Garrett Riley, new OC, and Kate Klubnik, I think, will be in a good offense for his skill set, and Clemson's returning a very good defense. I just don't see any way it's not Clemson, right, which would be a rematch, and to be honest with you, I can't tell you which game they're going to lose, right, in the regular season. It's going to be one of the LSU-Clemson game. I think I'm going to hedge there, right? LSU's neutral site. LSU, I think, has the potential to be very good. But also, if this game gets into a shootout, I think I kind of like Florida State there. It's neutral site, but it's in Orlando, right? It's kind of a home game. And I think Florida State's offense can if they can score the way they think they can, especially against LSU's defense, if they can really put points on the board, you're putting pressure on a quarterback in Jaden Daniels at LSU, who is a good player, but has been turnover prone at points in his career. And I think if you get into a little bit of a track meet, I like Florida State there. Again, big if scoring consistently against a good LSU defense, right? If you think you can, put together the offense I think we expect Florida State to have and really turn it into a track meet, I think that favors Florida State there. And it's more of a bona fide home game being in Orlando versus going on the road to Death Valley end of September in what's absolutely going to be a night game. And it's going to be college game day, the whole nine, right? That's a tougher spot on the road. And I think if I had to pick one, I think maybe, Florida State beats LSU and then loses on the road at Clemson, and then we'll see what happens in Charlotte. But, I think the hype is real around Florida State. Maybe they're one of those teams that goes 11-1, gets to the conference championship, and whoever lost the first game wins the second one because it's hard to beat the same team twice in a year. Ask Alabama that, right? SEC title game a few years ago. Ask Alabama. But yeah, I just think that this is a really good Florida State team. I think the schedule plays out really nicely. And I just don't see, Joe, you touched on it earlier, I just don't see where they trip up. I really don't. The BC game, for all the reasons you mentioned, could be tough just because it's a look-ahead spot. If it's a nooner, it's, red bandana game. Florida State's probably going to be at least a 2-touchdown favorite there, at least. And then, after the bye week, after you get out of September, show me the tough game. Maybe at Pitt and then home against Duke. But, you are getting Duke at home. I think there's a distinct talent advantage. And then at Pitt, you are the more talented team. Pittsburgh is well coached. Narduzzi will have him ready to play. But I just think there's too big of a talent differential there. And I look at the closing stretch in November after that Pitt game, and Miami, they could be mailing it in. They're very, James mentioned this, and we talked about with Cam on the preview, they're very young. North Alabama's an FCS game. And then Florida, I think Florida will be better, but they're not at Florida State's level from a talent standpoint right now. I think Napier will have a better year too, but they are not there right now. Show me the losses. At worst, it's a 10-2 regular season, I think. I would be shocked. It would be a Jordan Travis injury, in my opinion, for it to be 3 losses in the regular season. It would have to be a Jordan Travis injury. Otherwise, this is a colossal failure.
That's what I was going to say. Is I would be surprised if it ends up any worse than 10-2, and it probably does involve either a Jordan Travis injury or something really wonky happening at the end of a game somewhere, and just the ball bouncing wrong all day long. Some crazy would have to happen, I think, for them to lose in a lot of these spots. I'm gonna say 10-2. I'm tempted to go 11-1. I think part of that is I'm hedging my bets on that LSU game.
Yeah.
Do we know? Is that like a field goal spread one way or the other? LSU right now, I guess, is like a 2.5 point favorite in that game. I figure that'll be close. Yeah. LSU looked so good at the end of last year. Both these teams looked better at the end.
Really good coach.
Right, but both of these teams looked significantly better late in the year than they did early in the year. So I am a little nervous about that game if I'm a Florida State fan. So I'll say that they lose that. I don't expect them. I'm not 75% chance that LSU wins that game. I'm not saying that. Kind of a coin flip. The Clemson game is interesting to me. I'm still higher on Florida State this year than I am on Clemson for multiple reasons that we'll get into later. But one of the things that did stick out to me, and I thought about this as James was talking about that a little bit, the quarterback matchup in that spot. Now, it is in Death Valley, but remember, we're talking about, 19-year-old Cade Klubnik? He got a lot of snaps last year, but he's a true sophomore versus 29-year-old Jordan Travis. How old is he now? He's been playing football since – the Reagan administration or something like that. So
right.
That's a guy again who's got a lot of snaps, under his belt. He has been under the lights. That is very easily like a game day level, a college game day level kind of thing. You might get the 8:00 ESPN treatment, something like that. So it's bright lights that Jordan Travis has been under. He's played under. He has performed under, no problem. Cade Klubnik still maybe adjusting a little bit to this level. I'd feel good about Florida State in that spot. So I'm going to say 10-2. It's mostly feeling like I'm going to hedge my bets, say they maybe lose to LSU. I do think Florida State is going to trip up somewhere in ACC play. I don't know against who. It's just so hard to run the table is what I'm going to say. I think they very, very well could go 11-1. I think they're capable of going 12-0 for sure. But I will hedge my bets and say 10-2. And what's interesting is that the win total right now that I'm seeing is 9.5. But the over at minus 134 is what I'm seeing. So that's kind of a steep price to pay on betting a team to get to 10 wins. But if you think that they go under 9.5, you can get plus 110 on it. That's pretty good.
That would require them losing LSU, losing to Clemson. And then I think if you're betting the under, you're thinking, okay, they've lost twice. They're not going to a national championship. They're not going to a college football playoff, obviously. Like, even if they run the table in the ACC and get to Charlotte, and even if they go right 11-2, they're probably not making it to the college football playoff in theory.
Mm-hmm.
You're thinking that they're mailing it in October, right? And they lose somewhere, or in November after that bye week. They lose to somebody. They lose to Pitt. They lose to Duke. They're a little bit asleep at the switch because, everything, all that hype, everything they were playing for, that playoff spot is not going to come to fruition. That's how you get the plus money. I'm more apt to stay off of it, I think, just having those odds in mind. I think Florida State obviously has an excellent chance to win the league. We're not breaking any new ground saying that. I think they're the most talented team in the league. I think if they play kind of the way they did towards the end of last year, there's a pretty good chance they're the best coach team in the league. And that's with two-time national champion Dabo Swinney playing, still rolling good teams out in the ACC. But yeah, I think September is obviously going to tell us a lot. I think that Clemson game in particular is going to tell us a lot, not only about Florida State, but really about Clemson. I think how that game goes for Clemson, because it's Klubnik's first real big spot, because it's in Death Valley, because Florida State going there and winning would be monumental in terms of what that would mean for the rest of the year, not only for the Seminoles, but like if you get to Charlotte and rematch with Clemson, how good are you going to feel if you're a Florida State fan going into that game knowing we went into Death Valley in September, and we're probably facing a better Clemson team now than we played in September, but we went into Death Valley in September and won that game, and maybe we looked good doing it. What does that do for a confidence level going into a conference title game? So, it's going to be a really, really interesting game there. And I think for Clemson, it's really a couple game season too. So I think there's a lot of parallels between these two teams going into the year where I think they both have a chance to be very good. I don't think they're two of the elite teams in college football, but I think they're like that next tier of like fringe playoff teams. And I think they're both kind of in similar spots in terms of current roster and where this thing could go. So I'm going to go 11-1 though, because I do think Florida State splits in September. Just don't tell me which one of the big games they split, and I just think they're too talented on the rest of the schedule. I think it's 11-1.
You got them at 11-1. I got them at 10-2. I'll say this too. I'm not sure. We haven't totally decided if we're going to do a final like full league preview, just the two of us, basically. But if we do, I'll give you a spoiler right here. I'm picking Florida State to win the ACC Championship this year. I do like them. Whoever they face in Charlotte, I like Florida State. Assuming they make it there, I will probably be picking them to win that game as well. So I've got Florida State as the ACC champs. So I guess technically call it 11-2 is what I'm picking them to go.
Yeah. I guess that's. I guess that. Well, it would have to be 12-1 for mine to work out, and for them to get to a college football playoff, and for them to also be my pick to win the ACC, because they are. They're my pick to win the ACC as well. It's hard to ignore the veterans on both sides of the roster, the explosiveness of the offense. They're deep on defense. They're deep at the skill positions and
quarterback play.
Listen. Like everybody talks about Drake May, and Drake May was the pick to win Conference Player of the Year. My pick's Jordan Travis. For my money, he's the best quarterback in the ACC. I made the joke last year in the opener, and I texted you guys, and it's very funny now because I said it as a joke at the time. But Florida State was running it up on Duquesne in week 0. I think it was like 47-7, and Travis's stats were ridiculous. And this is coming off of a 2021 season where he was just okay, but he was starting to get better towards the end of the year. And I was like, oh, Jordan Travis, ACC Player of the Year, because he was like the only significant ACC contributor in week 0. And I was joking, and you guys told me to shut up, which was fair because I was joking. But now looking back on it, it's hysterical because I look at Jordan Travis now as an ACC Player of the Year candidate. Obviously, he's one of the 2 or 3 favorites to win the Heisman Trophy, which is hysterical in hindsight.
Nostromicus over here.
I just think that it's hard to ignore the veteran leadership at quarterback and what he did last year, and he's returning a more talented offense now, barring injury. I think Clemson will be better, and I think Clemson will be good. I think Clemson will be back towards kind of a level where we expect them to be offensively, especially where they're like looking like a playoff type team. But I don't think they're necessarily going to be there in September. Like, I think it's going to take a little time. And I think because of that, like, Florida State's my pick.
Mike, that's all I got on Florida State. Anything else?
No, I mean, it's going to be a really good team. Really good team, soft schedule. So I think it's a good recipe for a pretty good year.
Yeah, this is absolutely a team to watch. And we'll be with you every step of the way. So keep it tuned here. We'll keep you covered as things progress. Florida State hopefully going towards maybe a conference championship, maybe a playoff appearance, maybe even more. Maybe a Heisman winner, who knows? So keep it tuned here.
Or they'll go 9-3 and somebody will cash the under.
I was going to go like 7-5. I mean, you never know.
I mean, that would be just incredible content.
It would be. It would be. I mean, Miami missed a bowl game last year. You got to remember that. People forget. Then many people are saying.
Sources tell Cam. Hi, Cam.
Yeah. Make sure to remind him of that whenever you get the chance. All right, let's get out of here. Let's go preview some more teams. In the meantime, come find us on Twitter. I'm at FTRS Joey. He's at Mike McDaniel SI. Together, we're at BC Podcast ACC. Once again, go find James Coleman at Big Game James 36 on Twitter or X or whatever it is these days. But he was saying it with an underscore, but I don't think there's an underscore in there. So just at Big Game James 36 there, and once again at Den Media Group on YouTube for all things from James Coleman. Really, really appreciate his time and for him coming on here tonight. As I don't know if you guys realize, but he was in the car driving. Basically, he had to go in do some Jacksonville Jaguars coverage, which I think is a little bit better these days than it has been in recent years. So good on him. Appreciate his time and coming on helping to preview the Florida State season.
Yep.
Mike, we're on iTunes, Spotify, all those good places you go find your podcasts, subscribe, and do the rate and review thing and all that. We really appreciate that. You can send us an email with any questions, comments, concerns you have to the longest email address known to man, basketballconferencepodcast@gmail.com.
Nailed it.
Thank you. Where else are we on the social medias, Mike?
Facebook.com/basketballconference. Rate, review, find some of our podcasts there, including this one.
Mm-hmm.
On Instagram as well, at BC Podcast ACC, and on YouTube. And Joey, you're going to have to help me out with that one.
YouTube.com/@the ACC Football Podcast. Go
Boom.
find us there. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't done that already. We really appreciate the people that have, and that helps us out quite a bit as this show. So hopefully you guys like watching this on YouTube. If you get the chance, go check us out there. Probably going to try to do a little bit of maybe live stream content during the season. We'll see how producer Scott feels about that. We'll see.
Listen, if you hit subscribe, something's got to send our kids to college. That's all I'm going to say.
Might as well be this podcast.
It may as well be this podcast.
That's why we need the ACC to keep going on, is so I can send the kids to college. Yeah.
Early retirement. This is our work.
That's right. Yeah. Mike, that's all I got. Anything else?
We're good.
You want to come back and preview some more teams?
We're getting there, Joey.
We are getting there. I think we're halfway at this point. So
we are.
I think there's a Bon Jovi song about that.
Haven't heard of it.
I'll send it to you later. Don't worry.
Okay. Yeah. Good.
There we go. All right. Well, for that guy, Mr. Mike McDaniel, and for Mr. James Coleman, I am Joey Weaver. Thank you guys so much for listening. We will talk to you again soon as we continue previewing some teams. And until then, go Noles and go ACC.